October 14, 1943. Before sunrise, RAF Thorpe Abbotts is already awake. A low fog drifts across the airfield as crews move between hangars and briefing huts in near silence. Engines are still cold, aircraft dark and motionless, but everyone present understands the weight of the morning. This is not a routine mission. At 5:12 a.m., bomber crews are called into briefing rooms across eastern England. Curtains are drawn, guards posted at the doors, and a large map at the front of the room remains covered. Cigarettes burn down in shaking hands. When the curtain is finally pulled back, the room goes quiet. A red line stretches across Europe, cutting straight into the industrial heart of Germany. The target is Schweinfurt, again. No one speaks, but the reaction is immediate. Schweinfurt is where bombers disappear. By 1943, the United States Army Air Forces are fully committed to daylight precision bombing. The theory is straightforward: bomb during the day, hit specific factories, and dismantle Germany's ability to fight a modern war. The reality is far more brutal. Daylight means visibility. German gunners can see incoming bombers clearly. Fighters can track them from miles away, and there is no darkness to hide in. British crews bomb at night. American crews fly directly into enemy fire, fully exposed, trusting their aircraft, their formation, and each other to survive. Schweinfurt matters because it produces ball bearings, small, easily overlooked components that are essential to almost every machine Germany builds. Aircraft engines, tank transmissions, locomotives, factory equipment, all depend on them. Without ball bearings, production slows, then stops. German command knows this, which is why Schweinfurt is defended more heavily than almost any target in Europe. Radar stations blanket the region. Flak crews man their guns. Interceptors begin climbing to meet the incoming bombers. Germany is ready. The first flak bursts appear as black clouds ahead of the formation. These explosions are not aimed at individual aircraft, but at altitude and density, filling the sky with jagged steel fragments. Even a near miss can rip through aluminum, flesh, and control cables. The bomber formation shudders as shock waves ripple through the air. Inside the aircraft, the crew feels the vibrations as metal groans and small holes begin appearing along the fuselage. At first, the damage seems manageable. Reports come over the intercom: minor hits, systems holding, guns operational. This is the most dangerous moment of the mission: the waiting. The time between first flak and fighter contact, when crews know what is coming and can do nothing to stop it. Somewhere ahead, German fighters are climbing fast. When they arrive, they will not circle or test defenses. They will attack head-on, closing at hundreds of miles per hour, firing at point-blank range. The formation presses forward regardless, engines steady, guns loaded, bombs armed. Ahead lies the most heavily defended airspace in Europe, and one B-17 that will soon be torn apart piece by piece and refuse to fall.
As the bomber stream pushes deeper into Germany, the flak grows heavier and more precise. The black bursts no longer feel distant or random. They erupt at the same altitude as the formation, detonating with violent force just yards away from the aircraft. Each explosion sends razor-sharp steel fragments ripping outward, punching through wings, fuselage, and tail assemblies. Inside the B-17, the sound is unmistakable, metal being torn open, a deep, hollow cracking noise that echoes through the aircraft. The crew feels the shock through the control yoke in the floor beneath their boots. Instruments rattle, loose equipment jumps. No one needs to ask what that sound means. The first serious hit lands near the right wing. A flak fragment tears through the outer skin, slicing into internal structure before exiting in a spray of aluminum. The aircraft lurches slightly, then stabilizes. The engineer scans his gauges, calling out engine temperatures and oil pressure. Everything is still within limits, for now. The pilot tightens his grip and keeps the aircraft locked into formation. Leaving the group would mean isolation, and isolation over Germany means death. More flak follows. A burst detonates just below the nose, showering the cockpit with fragments. One piece punches through the plexiglass, cracking it but not fully shattering it. Cold air rushes inside instantly, turning breath into ice crystals. The navigator flinches as shards tear through his chart table. The bombardier feels the aircraft shudder beneath him, but stays focused forward, eyes locked on the path ahead. They are still minutes from fighter contact, and already the bomber is bleeding. German flak gunners are not firing blindly. They adjust constantly, tracking the speed and altitude of the formation, walking their bursts through the sky like a moving wall. Another explosion rocks the tail section. The tail gunner reports damage to his compartment, but confirms he is still operational. His voice is calm, almost casual, but everyone knows what it takes to stay composed in that position, alone, exposed, with nothing but glass and thin metal between him and the sky. As the formation advances, the flak briefly eases. This lull is deceptive. It does not mean safety. It means transition. German fighters are already airborne, climbing hard to reach interception altitude. Inside the bomber, the crew prepares instinctively. Gunners check ammunition belts, turrets rotate, scanning the sky. Oxygen masks are tightened. Everyone knows what comes next. The first fighters appear as tiny specks far ahead, barely distinguishable against the pale blue sky. Then more dots join them, spreading out, climbing, positioning themselves for attack. These are experienced pilots, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front and previous bomber interceptions. They know exactly where to aim. Engines, cockpits, wing roots, control surfaces. They are not trying to scare the bombers away. They are trying to dismantle them in the air. The attack begins head-on. German fighters dive straight toward the formation at closing speeds approaching 500 miles per hour. For a split second, they are perfectly aligned with the noses of the bombers. Then guns open fire. Tracers streak through the sky, flashing past the cockpit windows. The nose gunner fires back, the aircraft shuddering as machine guns hammer. One fighter flashes past so close the crew can see the pilot's canopy before it vanishes beneath the bomber. Another fighter follows immediately. This time, rounds slam into the forward fuselage. Metal tears open. A burst rips through the nose section, punching holes through equipment and structure before exiting behind the cockpit. The bombardier is thrown backward by the impact, his oxygen line snapping loose. Freezing air floods in, and the temperature inside the aircraft drops instantly. The navigator grabs him, helping reconnect the line as alarms scream and the aircraft shakes under continued fire. The fighters do not come alone. They attack in waves, timing their runs so that as one breaks off, another is already lining up. The sky becomes a violent blur of motion, tracers, and explosions. Waist gunners fire continuously, their guns overheating as they track targets crossing behind the bomber. Spent casings pile up around their feet. One burst from a German fighter tears through the waist section, shredding insulation and ripping new holes in the fuselage. A gunner cries out, wounded but still conscious. He stays at his position, refusing to leave the gun. Another hit strikes the left wing. This one is worse. A flak fragment punches through near the engine nacelle, damaging fuel lines. The smell of fuel fills the aircraft. The engineer shouts over the intercom, calling for immediate checks. Fire does not erupt, but the risk is clear. One spark could turn the bomber into a fireball. The pilot adjusts power carefully, keeping the engine running while minimizing the danger. Despite the damage, the B-17 holds formation. Around it, other bombers are not as fortunate. One aircraft peels away, trailing smoke, its formation broken. Moments later, it disappears in a distant explosion. Another spirals downward, wings shearing apart as it falls. No parachutes are visible. The formation tightens instinctively, closing gaps, reinforcing overlapping gunfire. Inside the damaged bomber, the hole count is already climbing. Small punctures dot the fuselage like shrapnel scars. Larger tears gape open along the wings and tail. Control cables vibrate but remain intact. Hydraulic pressure holds. Engines continue to run. Against all expectation, the aircraft is still flying as intended. As the fighters finally break off to regroup, the crew takes stock. Voices come over the intercom, clipped and professional. Injuries reported, systems checked, guns still firing. The navigator confirms they are on course. The target lies ahead. Turning back now would mean crossing the same gauntlet alone. The decision is unspoken, but unanimous. They will continue. The bomber presses deeper into German airspace, more damaged than it has ever been, yet still functional. The flak ahead grows thicker once again, signaling the approach to the most heavily defended zone. Schweinfurt is close now, and the worst is still to come. By the time the bomber formation reaches the outer defensive ring of Schweinfurt, the sky itself seems hostile. Flak bursts no longer come sporadically, they erupt constantly, overlapping into a near-continuous field of explosions. The airframe shudders under repeated impacts, each one sending vibrations through the structure like hammer blows. Inside the B-17, the noise is overwhelming. It is not a single sound, but a layered assault. Engines roaring, flak detonations pounding, machine guns firing, metal tearing, alarms screaming. The aircraft is no longer simply being hit, it is being dismantled in the air. A direct flak burst detonates off the starboard side, close enough to lift the bomber slightly before dropping it back into formation. Shrapnel tears through the fuselage, carving long, jagged holes through skin and frame. One fragment slices through a control cable, partially severing it. The pilot feels the change immediately. The controls grow heavy, sluggish, responding a fraction of a second slower than before. He compensates instinctively, adjusting trim and pressure, fighting to keep the aircraft level. In the ball turret, the gunner feels the cold intensify as new holes open around him. Wind howls through the compartment, stealing heat from his body faster than the heated suit can replace it. He rotates the turret, tracking movement below, firing short bursts at fighters climbing beneath the formation. A sudden impact slams into the turret's outer shell. The entire sphere jolts violently. For a moment, the gunner fears the mechanism is jammed, trapping him. Then it moves again. He exhales and keeps firing. German fighters return in force, this time attacking from multiple angles. Some dive from above, others slash upward from below, and several make high-speed passes from the rear. The tail gunner opens fire repeatedly, his tracers arcing into the sky. One fighter pulls away, trailing smoke. Another breaks off sharply, narrowly missing the bomber's tail. But for every fighter driven away, another takes its place. The attacks are relentless, coordinated, and precise. A burst of cannon fire rips through the midsection of the aircraft. The radio operator is thrown sideways as rounds punch through the radio compartment, destroying equipment and leaving a ragged hole large enough to see daylight through. The intercom crackles, then cuts out entirely. Communication between crew positions becomes fragmented, reduced to shouted messages and hand signals when possible. Despite this, each man continues his role without hesitation. Training takes over where communication fails. The left wing takes another hit, this one deeper than before. A flak fragment tears through internal structure, leaving a gaping wound that exposes spars and fuel lines. Fuel sprays briefly into the slipstream before dissipating. The engineer reports fluctuating pressure. The pilot throttles back slightly, balancing power across the remaining engines. The bomber loses a small amount of altitude, then stabilizes again. It should not still be flying, yet it is. As the formation nears the target, German defenses intensify further. Flak batteries concentrate their fire, filling the air ahead with exploding shells. The bombardier moves into position, lying prone in the shattered nose, peering through cracked plexiglass and swirling smoke. His instruments are damaged but usable. He aligns the bomb sight manually, compensating for drift and vibration. This is the most dangerous phase of the mission. Bombers must fly straight and level to ensure accuracy, making them perfect targets. The pilot holds the aircraft steady, resisting every instinct to evade. Another flak burst detonates directly beneath the bomber, sending a shock wave through the fuselage. The floor flexes. A section of insulation rips loose and flaps wildly in the wind. Somewhere behind him, a crewman groans in pain, but there is no time to check on injuries. The aircraft must remain on course. German fighters exploit the moment. Two make head-on passes in rapid succession, firing at point-blank range. Tracers streak past the cockpit, one round tearing through the instrument panel, shattering glass and disabling a gauge. The co-pilot flinches but keeps his hands steady. Another burst slams into the nose, expanding existing holes into massive tears. The bombardier is thrown sideways again, his shoulders smashed against the frame. He stays conscious, he stays focused. The hole count climbs rapidly now. Dozens become scores, scores become hundreds. The fuselage resembles torn fabric more than metal, riddled with punctures of every size. Control surfaces are scarred, guns are damaged, some falling silent as mounts are destroyed or ammunition feeds jam. Yet enough guns remain operational to keep the attackers at bay. The interlocking fields of fire still work, even if imperfectly. At last, the target fills the bombardier's view. Smoke from previous strikes rises from the factories below. Flak erupts violently, trying desperately to break the formation before bombs can be released. Inside the battered B-17, the bombardier calls out the final seconds. The pilot grips the controls, holding the aircraft steady despite vibration, damage, and sheer physical exhaustion. For a brief moment, everything narrows to a single point: course, speed, timing. Then the bombardier calls it. Bombs away. The aircraft lurches upward as thousands of pounds of explosives drop free, falling toward the factories below. Almost immediately, the pilot banks away, breaking from the straight path at last. The bombing run is complete. The mission objective has been achieved. But the ordeal is far from over. As the B-17 turns away from the target, the damage that was once secondary becomes impossible to ignore. The aircraft no longer flies cleanly. Every movement is heavy, delayed, resisted by bent metal and compromised controls. Air roars through the fuselage in violent streams, turning the interior into a frozen tunnel of noise and wind. Loose equipment is ripped from its mounts and flung against bulkheads. Maps tear free. Insulation whips through the cabin like shredded cloth. The bomber is no longer sealed. It is exposed, bleeding air and heat with every second it remains aloft. The pilot struggles to maintain altitude. One engine begins to run rough, its vibrations uneven and alarming. Oil pressure fluctuates wildly. The engineer watches the gauges, knowing that pushing the engine too hard could seize it entirely, but throttling back too far risks losing altitude over enemy territory. Every decision now is a trade-off between survival and catastrophe. The aircraft is operating on the edge of its limits, held together by redundancy and sheer momentum. In the waist section, the gunners fight both the enemy and the environment. Their compartments are shredded, the metal skin torn open in multiple places. Wind howls through the gaps, freezing exposed skin in seconds. One gun mount is twisted out of alignment, forcing its gunner to brace himself awkwardly just to keep firing. Blood freezes on the floor where a wounded crewman was dragged clear of the firing line. No one stops. There is no room for shock, no time for fear. Each man stays locked into his role, because letting go means giving up. Another flak burst detonates close enough to feel like a physical blow. Shrapnel rips through the tail section, tearing away chunks of metal and severing internal components. The tail gunner feels the aircraft shudder violently, then settle into an uneasy balance. He reports that his control cables feel loose, that the structure around him is visibly warped. Still, his guns fire. Still, he watches the sky behind them. German fighters make one last attempt to finish the crippled bomber. They circle cautiously now, aware that even damaged flying fortresses can still kill. A pair dives in from above, firing short, controlled bursts. Rounds punch through the upper fuselage, adding new holes to the hundreds already carved into the aircraft. One burst strikes near the cockpit, showering the pilot and co-pilot with fragments. Neither is seriously wounded, but the shock is enough to rattle their focus. They hold steady. Gradually, the attacks thin. Fuel is limited. Ammunition is running low. German pilots break off, searching for easier targets. The bomber formation, once tight and imposing, is now scattered and uneven. Gaps mark where aircraft were lost. Smoke trails hang in the air where others fell. The damaged B-17 flies on, alone but still airborne, its silhouette scarred and uneven against the sky. Inside, the crew begins to take stock of injuries. One man is badly wounded but conscious. Another is suffering from shock and extreme cold. Oxygen systems have failed in several compartments, forcing crewmen to share masks or function without them, fighting dizziness and fading vision. Frostbite sets in to fingers and faces, speech slurs, movements slow, yet the aircraft remains controllable, barely. This is where the true extent of the damage becomes clear. Looking through the interior, crewmen can see daylight from almost every angle. Holes pepper the fuselage so densely that the aircraft resembles a sieve. Larger tears expose internal frames and wiring. Control surfaces are scarred and partially deformed. Fuel tanks have been punctured but not ignited. Engines are battered but running. By any rational measure, the bomber should have broken apart long ago. The pilot keeps the aircraft steady, nursing it toward friendly airspace. Every minute aloft feels stolen. Every vibration suggests imminent failure. The crew knows that ditching in the sea or crash landing in occupied territory are still possibilities. Parachutes are checked silently. No one speaks the thought aloud. As the German coastline finally falls behind them, a fragile sense of relief settles over the aircraft. The flak is gone. The fighters are gone. Only the long flight home remains. But even now, danger lingers. Structural failure, engine fire, loss of control, any of it could still end the mission in seconds. Survival is no longer about combat. It is about endurance. The B-17 presses on, wounded, frozen, and barely holding together, carrying a crew that refuses to let it fall. The full cost of the damage will not be understood until they land. Until then, the bomber continues to fly, a testament to design, discipline, and an almost unreasonable refusal to quit.
What keeps the B-17 in the air now is no longer luck. It is design. It is doctrine. It is a system built around the assumption that damage is inevitable and survival depends on absorbing it. The flying fortress was never meant to avoid being hit. It was meant to keep flying after it was hit. Every major system on the aircraft was designed with redundancy in mind. Control cables ran in multiple paths. Hydraulic systems could fail without fully disabling flight surfaces. Engines were spaced so that the loss of one or even two would not immediately doom the aircraft. What looks miraculous from the outside is, in reality, a series of calculated engineering decisions performing exactly as intended. The wings are the clearest example. Unlike lighter bombers, the B-17's wings are built around massive spars, capable of carrying extreme loads even when damaged. Flak has torn holes clean through them, exposing internal structure, yet the core remains intact. Stress that would have snapped lesser designs is redistributed across the remaining structure. The aircraft flexes instead of breaking. Every vibration feels dangerous, but the wing holds, refusing to shear away. The engines, though battered, continue to run because each is a self-contained unit. Fuel lines are rerouted where possible, firewalls isolate damage. One engine sputters, another runs hot, but together they still generate enough thrust to maintain altitude. The pilot balances power constantly, adjusting throttle and propeller pitch, coaxing performance from machines that have every reason to fail. This is not smooth flight, it is controlled struggle. Equally critical is the aircraft's defensive layout. Even with multiple guns disabled, enough remain operational to discourage close pursuit. German pilots learned quickly that attacking a B-17 head-on or from the rear carried lethal risk. The interlocking fields of fire mean that no single fighter can approach without exposing itself to multiple gunners. This forces attackers to break off earlier than they would prefer, reducing the accuracy and lethality of their passes. The damaged bomber benefits from this even now, its remaining guns creating just enough threat to keep enemies at a distance. Inside the aircraft, crew discipline plays an equally decisive role. No one panics. No one abandons position unnecessarily. Wounded crewmen continue to perform their duties as long as they are physically able. When systems fail, others compensate without discussion. Tasks overlap, responsibilities blur. Survival becomes a shared function rather than an individual one. This is not heroism in the dramatic sense, it is procedural resilience drilled into crews through relentless training. German tactics, effective against isolated or poorly flown bombers, struggle against this kind of endurance. Fighters can inflict damage, even catastrophic damage, but they cannot always deliver a clean kill. Ammunition runs low, fuel becomes a concern, pilots face increasing risk with each pass. Over time, even a severely damaged B-17 can outlast its attackers simply by refusing to fall quickly enough. As the bomber continues westward, the crew begins to understand that they may actually make it back. The realization is cautious, almost superstitious. No one celebrates. The aircraft is still shaking, still wounded, still operating far outside normal parameters, but it is flying. And every mile closer to the coast is a mile further from enemy guns. The cold becomes the next enemy. With insulation shredded and holes everywhere, the interior temperature plummets. Frost forms on exposed skin and equipment. Hands stiffen around controls and gun grips. Breathing becomes laborious. Fatigue settles in heavily now that the adrenaline fades. Maintaining focus requires conscious effort. The pilot's arms ache from constant corrections. The engineer watches his gauges with bleary eyes, afraid to blink for too long. Finally, the coastline appears beneath the clouds, friendly waters, friendly skies. The bomber descends slowly, carefully, unwilling to stress its damaged structure any more than necessary. Escort fighters move into position, their pilots stunned by the sight of the battered flying fortress still airborne. They fly close, inspecting the damage, later describing an aircraft that looked more like wreckage than a functioning machine. As the bomber approaches its base, ground crews scramble, watching in disbelief. The bomber lines up for landing, its approach uneven and unstable. The pilot fights the controls one last time, easing the aircraft down. The wheels touch the runway. The landing is hard but controlled. Metal screams in protest, but the aircraft stays upright. It rolls to a stop. Only then does the crew fully grasp what they have survived.
The bomber comes to rest at the edge of the airfield, engines coughing before finally falling silent. For several seconds, no one moves. The sudden quiet feels unreal after hours of violence. Inside the aircraft, the crew remains strapped in, breathing hard, hands numb, ears ringing. Only when the pilot cuts the last switch does the reality settle in. They are on the ground. They survived. Ground crews approach cautiously at first, unsure of what they are seeing. From a distance, the B-17 barely resembles an aircraft. Its skin is torn and punctured across nearly every surface. Sections of fuselage are peeled back like torn fabric. The wings are scarred with gaping holes, their internal structure exposed to open air. The tail section hangs slightly out of alignment, warped by repeated impacts. One crew chief later describes it as
a plane that looked like it had already crashed but forgot to stop flying. As hatches open, crewmen climb out slowly, stiff and exhausted. Some are helped down, others stumble on frozen legs. Medics rush forward, immediately treating wounds, frostbite, and shock. Only now does the full cost of the mission become visible. Blood stains the interior, equipment lies twisted and shattered, entire systems are destroyed. And yet, the aircraft carried them home. Inspection teams begin their work almost immediately. They photograph every section, every tear, every puncture. They count carefully. One hole, then another, then another. Small caliber rounds, cannon strikes, flak fragments. The numbers climb steadily past anything normally recorded. When the count finally stops, it exceeds 200 separate penetrations. Over 200 holes in an aircraft that flew a full combat mission, dropped its bombs, and returned intact. Word spreads quickly across the base. Crews gather around the bomber in stunned silence. Many have lost friends on the same mission. Others recognize how close they themselves came to the same fate. This B-17 becomes a symbol, not of invincibility, but of endurance. It proves something crews already suspected, but hoped they would never have to test so completely: that the flying fortress could take unimaginable punishment and still fight. From a strategic perspective, the mission reinforces painful truths on both sides. For the Americans, it confirms that daylight bombing is possible, but only at enormous cost. It accelerates changes in tactics, escort deployment, and aircraft design. For the Germans, it underscores a growing problem. Even when bombers are hit repeatedly, even when fighters and flak perform effectively, the destruction does not always stop. The system refuses to collapse quickly enough. The B-17 itself does not fly again. The damage is too extensive. It is written off, stripped for parts, its combat days over. But its story lives on through reports, photographs, and the men who flew it. In training briefings, instructors point to its damage patterns to explain redundancy and survivability. In crew rooms, its mission becomes a quiet reference point, a reminder of what is possible and what must be endured. What made this aircraft survive was not a single secret weapon. It was not luck alone. It was a convergence of design philosophy, tactical doctrine, and human discipline. Redundant systems that assumed failure would happen. A structure built to bend instead of break, crews trained to function under collapse rather than panic, and an enemy forced to expend time, fuel, and lives trying to destroy something that simply would not fall fast enough. By the end of the war, thousands of B-17s will be lost. Tens of thousands of airmen will never return. The flying fortress will not win the war on its own, but missions like this one help tip the balance. They wear down defenses, they force change, they prove that industrial resilience, applied relentlessly, can overcome even the most determined opposition. On October 14, 1943, over Schweinfurt, one B-17 absorbed more damage than logic allows. It should have broken apart at altitude. It should have fallen in flames. It should have been another black plume over Germany. Instead, it finished the mission. And that is why it is remembered.